and there's intimacy on the radio, and there's naturalness on the radio that can never be replicated on TV. The marvelous resurgence of radio as a political force in this country.
News-related radio programming is evolving.
There's a huge hole in our dialogue that can be filled by the synthesis of traditional radio and the freedom that comes from a live podcast. You're about to experience Cowboy State Politics live. Here we go. Good morning, my friends, and welcome to another fantastic installment from very high above all the puerile and insipid forms of Wyoming mainstream media. This is Cowboy State Politics. I, of course, am your illustrious host, David Iverson, firmly ensconced behind the silver Cowboy State Politics microphone and broadcasting to you from the depths of the Middle Swamp in Wyoming's capital of Cheyenne. Good morning, my friends, and welcome to the program. Happy Wednesday. There's a ton of stuff going on in the Wyoming legislature right now. Of course, we're right, and things always speed up at the end of the legislative session. I mean, there's bills that have to be signed by both the House, or the Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate, and stuff to go to the governor, and there's deadlines, and things get a little bit crazy right now. But the top story this morning that I want to talk to you about is Senate File 69. And there are a lot of news articles in just about every Wyoming, so-called Wyoming media outlet, the Cow Pie, the Wyoming Turkey Vulture, the Wild Pile. All of them have pieces, but the details behind it are fascinating. And I don't want to go too deep into it because on the podcast this morning, I have an interview with Representative Tony Locke, who is the House Chairman of the Joint Conference Committee, with Representative Chris Knapp, who is also on the Joint Conference Committee, and with House Appropriations Chair John Baer. And it's a discussion about what happened in the Joint Conference Committee. If you pay attention to the Wyoming media, which you should never do, most of what they do is lie to you, you're led to believe that there was a deal in place to have Senate File 69 sent to the governor, and it was the House that welched on the deal. Well, I can tell you for a fact, my friends, that there's a ton more to this story that is not being reported by most of the media. Now, I don't do this very often, and it really, this is a hard one for me, but to Trotsky Wolfson's credit, he actually gives you a pretty good rundown of what happened yesterday. It's uncharacteristically fair, and good job to Leo for going into it. And that's where I want to kind of begin this morning. First of all, there really was no deal. And there's a lot of people in the Senate, in Senate leadership, by the way, Tim Salazar, Troy McEwen, and Kangaroo Mike Giroux are trying to lead you to believe that they had a deal in place to finish this puppy off and send it to the governor. Well, there's a couple of big reasons why that's not true, and I go into depth on those in the podcast, which, by the way, the podcast will be published right around 10 o'clock, so you can listen to the entire interview there. But the nuts and bolts of it are, one side's telling the truth, the other side's telling a different story, and the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. But one thing is very clear, that the Wyoming Senate is jockeying for position with the Wyoming House. There's a number of bills that are probably not going to be heard in the Wyoming Senate, and a lot of them are the big bills that came out of the Wyoming House. The 5 and dime plan, most of those have not been heard, or at least haven't been heard on the floor yet. And you know, if you go back to my original prediction before this whole session ever started, it was that the Senate was probably going to kill a bunch of bills, or they were going to water a whole bunch of them down, and so that the House plan really didn't do all that much. But I think an overarching narrative that I don't want to be lost in this whole discussion is from the very beginning, from before anybody ever took the reins in the House of Representatives, the narrative was conservatives can't govern. Conservatives don't know what they're doing. Conservatives, I mean, you just can't let them have power, and you have to give it back to us liberals. Well, the truth is that when you look at the House of Representatives in total, it's been run pretty fairly. And that's the best that you can hope for many years, decades even. The liberals were in power, and if you were a conservative, your bills were going nowhere. That you weren't going to get an amendment passed, and it was only by sheer luck that really anything that's remotely conservative got through the House of Representatives. All that has changed. And one item that I wanted to bring up, and I think this is probably one of the more important things, though it has been entirely overlooked to some degree, even by me. The Democrats in the House of Representatives, there's only 6 of them. They're in the extreme minority most of the time. They vote with the redcoats, but many of them have had bills come through the Wyoming House. Speaker Nyman has made a conscious effort to make sure that everybody's treated fairly, and I think that there's lots of evidence that. There's no way that you would have had that happen under Albert Sommers or Steve Harshman. Those two guys, they didn't really care what the conservative agenda was, and so whatever they wanted got passed. That's not been the case in the Wyoming House. But I didn't want that to get lost in this whole narrative, because there's a ton of things that are happening in the Wyoming legislature, and all of them are important, but some things get left behind. One of the big stories out of the Senate is they've been pretty opposed to just about any form of illegal immigration legislation. Of course, they killed House Bill 124, which was the big anti-illegal immigration bill. That one was sponsored by Sherry Steinmetz, and it was pretty much just killed outright. That would have made it illegal to harbor an illegal alien or to not report it, and it would have forced Wyoming sheriffs to actually do their job and detain illegal immigrants. And it's a fascinating thing in this country, my friends. We went from a time where entering the country illegally, and if you got caught, you were going to be deported. And there was really no question about it. The laws were pretty stringent. And then came the Biden administration, when they pretty much opened up the gates at the southern and northern border and said, hey, man, if you want to come in, come on in. You're not going to get prosecuted. And now you have legislators, even in the state of Wyoming, and I would still argue that while we do have some leftists, a leftist in Wyoming is, still not the crazy Chuck Schumer type, Nancy Pelosi type, Adam Schiff type that we see in Washington, D.C. I mean, they're still pretty liberal, and I mean, the bar is pretty low here. But, still, it's been very difficult to get any sort of legislation passed of any meaning out of the Wyoming Senate. And that's because conservatives are not in control of the Wyoming Senate. And I think by the end of this thing, it's going to be absolutely clear. And we're going to have a lot of evidence to support that claim, that it's not the conservatives that are running things. Even though they might be in the top seat, yeah, that doesn't really mean that they're in control or anything. There's a big story about Senate File 40. That one's unfolding as we speak. And it's, according to the Senate, Mike Kangaroo Giroux, who is the chairman of the conference committee on that one, he's just not going to have a meeting. And he thinks that, not talking about it, that can kill the bill. Well, according to Mason's Manual of Legislative Procedure and the rules of the Wyoming legislature, that's not really a thing. Yet, the leadership in the House is allowing that to happen. And it's, the thing that is difficult about this is it is a group effort over there. The Senate President, Bo Beitman, the Majority Floor Leader, Tara Nethercott, Slithers, the Vice President of the Senate, and all of their committee chairmanships. And that's probably another thing that has been glossed over by the Wyoming media. When you look at all the committees over in the Senate, each and every one of them has a gatekeeper, and they're either the chairman of the committee or they're a pretty influential person on the committee. Take, for example, let's see here, Senate Corporations. The chairman of that one is Nancy Case. Now, if you were a conservative president of the Senate, would you really put Nancy Case in charge of corporations? The committee where all of the election-related bills are going, by the way, that's another category of bills that aren't doing so hot over in the Senate. What about Wendy Schuler, Would you make her a chairman? Or Eric Barlow? Would you put Eric Barlow in charge of the committee where all the pro-life legislation goes through? Probably not. Now, Eric Barlow, he's got an interesting record when it comes to pro-life legislation. When he's the chairman or when he's the Speaker of the House, pro-life bills go in his drawer. Other than that, though, when he's not in charge, he's got a pretty solid voting record on pro-life issues. So it's a really strange one there. But all of the committees over in the House or over in the Senate, they have a gatekeeper that's not necessarily in charge, but is definitely on the committee. And then, again, Senate leadership. And then I think when you look at the floor votes, which is really not under the control of the Senate president. We can't blame that one on Bo Biden. He doesn't have any real control over how people vote. But I think if you look at the results of the vote, it's pretty clear that the Senate is not nearly as conservative as the House of Representatives, which perhaps that's a little bit of an unfair comparison because the conservatives in the House of Representatives have a giant majority. So there are a ton of stories that are still unfolding as we speak in this legislative session. And, it's going to probably take me months to dissect all of this. But like I said, I'm going to keep you updated and make sure that you don't miss the podcast today. It's a great interview between the guys that are on the Joint Conference Committee and John Baer. They're telling a very different story than the one that the Wyoming media is. And you don't want to miss that. So that'll be published about 10-ish o'clock. I still have to finish putting it together, but I'm shooting for 10 o'clock. But we begin this morning. Let's first begin. I already began. So let's go to the cow pie. There's an interesting article entitled Non-Citizen Status Will Be on the Back, Not the Front of Wyoming Licenses and IDs. Again, this is another election-related bill, and it's also kind of an illegal immigration-related bill, but more so on the election side of it. One of the problems is that Wyoming driver's licenses and IDs do not depict whether you are a United States citizen or not. So the bill in question was to make that pretty clear on the ID. And during the interim and the original bill, which I'm going to go into the article here in just a second, the whole idea was to denote on the front of the ID somehow that you're not a U.S. citizen. Well, the compromise in the conference committee was to put a notice on the back of the ID. Now, okay, so it's still got a notice on there. It still says not a U.S. citizen. But the problem is when most IDs are checked, most specifically at the polling location, my guess is most of them don't get turned over. And so if you're asking a volunteer election official to make sure that they look at both sides of the ID, it seems pretty simple, but it could be kind of a complicated concept. Let's go to the article. And I quote, "The Wyoming legislature approved a final version of a bill Tuesday that will more clearly delineate non-U.S. citizen status on Wyoming driver's licenses and IDs by printing notifications on the back of these cards. Senate File 33 creates a new driver's license and state ID for those who are in the country legally but are not a United States citizen. The current disclaimer on state ID cards reads NR for non-resident and is listed on the front of the cards. The new cards, if approved by the governor, will state not a U.S. citizen. The purpose of the bill is to make it abundantly clear to election judges that a non-U.S. citizen is attempting to vote, and for law enforcement officers when they encounter one of these individuals. It's one of a dozen bills brought by this year's Wyoming legislature as an attempt to curb illegal immigration. Like I said, this is more of an election integrity bill than it is an illegal immigration bill, because if you have an ID and you're in the country legally, there's already rules set for that. So this is an example. This is a case where you're trying to prevent somebody who is not a U.S. citizen, who is not eligible to vote, to have that printed on their license. Senate File 33 adds a much larger disclaimer to the Wyoming's non-citizen IDs that the person on the cards is not a U.S. citizen. John Kolb's irritation with this is that this disclaimer, at least initially, will be located on the back of the cards. Quote, We never had a conversation about putting something on the back of the cards during the interim topic discussions and where this would go. It never came up, he said during a joint conference committee on the bill on Tuesday. It's the first time I've heard about putting this on the back. Well, John Cole probably should have gone to committee meetings on this bill because it actually was discussed during committee meetings. Let's see if I can find this for you. Senator Stephen Pappas of Cheyenne said that although the location of the disclaimer and its color wasn't brought up during last summer's interim session, as Kolb mentioned, it was brought up during committee meetings in this year's legislative session. He said legislators were told by Whiteout staff that real estate, in quotation marks, exists on both sides of the card for the disclaimer. Representative Mike Yin of Jackson also pointed out that the only change the JCC could make on Tuesday was to the language of the disclaimer, and that was the only difference between the House and the Senate's version of the bill. A JCC exists to iron out the differences between the two chambers' actions on a single piece of legislation. Remember that quotation because it's going to be in the podcast episode. It's really important what the JCC can do. And I mean, while we're there, well, I just looked at the clock. Let's go ahead and take a break. And when we come back, we'll continue with this story. And I'll tell you what a joint conference committee is supposed to do. So we'll do that after the break. Lots to talk about on today's edition of the program. Stick around. We got more after the break. Christmas is over, and all of the fun holiday cheer has been had. And what are we all left with? Frigid Wyoming weather. Below freezing temperatures that you still have to go out in. That's right, you do have to go back to work at one point or another. And not to scare you, but think about this. Every single morning, you get to scrape the ice off of your windshield. Now, while I can't do anything with that, I can make sure that your feet stay nice and toasty warm while you're doing it. All you have to do is order a pair of socks from the Buffalo Wool Company. They are the finest socks that I've ever put on my feet. And to get you a pair of them, go to the website, thebuffalowoolco.com. Trust me, you're not going to be disappointed. Wyoming is one of the most sought-after places to live. There's a lot of people that want to move to our great state. And if you're thinking about selling your house to one of them, you need a real estate agent that you can trust. That agent is Rebecca Bextel at Compass Real Estate. She's lived in Jackson for almost 20 years and has her fingers on the pulse of the real estate market. Last year, she sold almost $25 million worth of property. So if you're thinking of buying or selling, give Rebecca a call. Her phone number is 307-699-3519.
I've never felt the freedom like I do. I feel stronger every day, don't you? Well, I can show you how. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. I've never felt the freedom like I do. I feel stronger every day. I'm only gonna get stronger.
This program, Cowboy State Politics, is only going to get stronger. The program is only going to continue to expand. From every county in Wyoming to every state in this nation, we're well on our way. You can listen to the podcast, you can listen to this program on YouTube, Facebook, X, on Rumble, and pretty much anywhere. I mean, it's almost like I'm omnipresent. The podcast you can listen to at the website, cowboystatepolitics.com, or anywhere that you get your podcasts. Again, you don't want to miss the podcast that's going to be published about 10 o'clock today. There's a whole bunch of stuff in it. A great interview with people who are actually in the room of the Joint Conference Committee. It's a very different story than the one that the Wyoming media is peddling. And you want to get it straight from the horse's mouth. Let's just say that most people in the Wyoming media, yeah, they're lying to you. And you shouldn't expect anything else because that's what they do. They're a bunch of leftists, and that's kind of in the job description, right? If you're going to work for the Wyoming media, kind of got to be willing to lie a little bit, which is exactly what's happening. All right, back to this illegal immigration driver's license discussion. Before the break, I read you a quotation from Mike Yen, and this one is really, really important. Let me read it to you again. Quote, Representative Mike Yen of Jackson also pointed out that the only change the JCC could make on Tuesday was to the language of the disclaimer. And that was the only difference between the House and Senate versions of the bill. A JCC exists to iron out the differences between the two chambers' actions on a single piece of legislation. Again, super important as it relates to this bill and Senate File 69. So what happens is the House and the Senate pass a version of the bill. And, there may have been amendments added and amendments deleted. And, for example, on Senate File 69 in the House, I think there was something like 35 different amendments that were added at one point and deleted at another. But it's the final version of the bill that comes out of that chamber. And so the leadership, the Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate, they select three people to go to a meeting and to iron out the differences. But they can't introduce new things into the bill, because everybody in either chamber already voted on their final version of the bill. And so these three people by themselves can't change the piece of legislation in the first joint conference committees. What they can do is negotiate a position between the two versions. So, for example, let's say that that one house, and let's just a hypothetical example here. Let's say the House of Representatives passes a bill where they're going to give $100 million to the governor to spend however he wants. And the Senate passes a version of that says, well, we're only going to give $50 million to the governor to spend. I mean, this could definitely come out of the Senate, but I can't imagine it coming out of the House this year. Anyway, the Senate says $50 million. Well, the Joint Conference Committee could negotiate, and they could come to a compromise of $75 million because it's between the two positions of the House. So this change with the driver's license, and for Senate File 69 for that matter, isn't part of the final version of the bill. So let's go back to the article. Quote, Stephan Pappas then added that putting the disclaimer on the back doesn't bother him, which again drew a response from Kolb, who argued that WYODOT's internal rulemaking is hindering the will of the legislature. Quote, well, apparently we can't even talk about that, Mr. Chairman, Kolb said. It's unfortunate we're talking about this point now where all we're talking about is this, and we have other rulemaking authority to do basically what the heck they want to. Now, the problem here, the biggest problem here, is WYDOT. During the interim, there were several funny discussions about how much it was going to cost to put different lettering on the front of the license, and WYDOT threw out some huge numbers. It's going to be like tens of thousands of dollars just to put another letter on there. And I believe it was Representative Ken Pendergraft. He said, "Now wait a minute, you changed the name on driver's licenses all the time. In fact, on concealed carry permits, they look entirely different than driver's licenses. So why is this so expensive?" Well, the truth is that you have a lot of agencies, well, all agencies really, are run by bureaucrats, and they don't want to do anything that's outside of their normal job duties. They don't want to make their job any harder. Anyway, so back to the article. Let's see here. Where did I want to go? Okay, Representative Ken Pendergraft. Wait a minute. Let's back up a little bit. Quote, Secretary of State Chuck Gray said that the location of the disclaimer was an acceptable compromise in order to get the bill passed. He mentioned how the NR designation is not on the non-citizen cards of legal long-term residents. Quote, the bill fixes that problem so that it will have the non-citizen designations in these cases, while also making the designation itself clearer. We will continue to work to strengthen the tools for election integrity in Wyoming by making these designations more and more prominent. This is a massive step in the right direction. Representative Ken Pendergraft of Sheridan also said he likes the backside location for the disclaimer, as it allows to be written out in full. An earlier version of the bill would have had the disclaimer read, "Not U.S., which Pappas said he preferred in order to make it as short as possible, in order to give more flexibility to fit wherever it was desired on the card. An amendment that was brought by Representative Landon Brown. By the way, it's been 1,400 and change days since Landon Brown agreed to an interview on Cowboy state politics and then didn't show up. He added the word citizen to this title. The JCC unanimously adopted the House's version of the bill, which was approved by the Senate on a 28-3 vote later in the day. Kolb also voted in support of adopting the bill. The truth is, my friends, that illegal immigration is a problem in every state. And if you've taken any visit to Jackson, and I don't even know why Jackson seems to be the epicenter of this, but when the lovely Christine and I were on our honeymoon in Jackson, we were shocked at how many immigrants we saw. And just working various jobs. And, of course, you don't know if they're illegal or not. We were just shocked at the amount of people from other countries that were there. And evidently, Jackson is one of the epicenters of that. Moving on to another aspect of this whole illegal immigration business, article in the Cowboy, written by Sean Berry, entitled "Wyoming Delegation Pushes to Halt Federal Money for Sanctuary Cities." And I quote, this is at the federal level, a bill introduced in Congress on Tuesday, backed by U.S. senators from Wyoming, Idaho, Montana, Utah, and Nebraska, would block federal funding to sanctuary cities, a term jurisdictions with policies that harbor illegal immigrants. The legislation, called the No Bailout for Sanctuary Cities Act, was announced by Senator Jim Risch of Idaho. Co-sponsors, all Republicans, include Risch's Idaho colleague, U.S. Senator Mike Crapo, and also included Senators Steve Daines, Tim Sheehy, both of Montana, and Pete Ricketts of Nebraska, and Mike Lee of Utah. Senate Majority Whip John Barrasso is not yet an official co-sponsor, but told the Cowboy that he backs the bill. He also said he supports an executive order signed last week by President Trump to block federal agencies and programs from providing taxpayer-funded services to illegal immigrants. Quote, "It's an outrageous insult to the American people to use our taxpayer dollars to subsidize sanctuary cities and their handouts to illegal immigrants," Barrasso said. "I support Senator Risch's legislation as well as President Trump's executive action to crack down on sanctuary cities and eliminate incentives that fueled the immigration crisis in the first place. I'll continue to fight against any money from taxpayers in Wyoming and across the country from falling into the hands of those who break our laws." Senator Cynthia Lummis is not a co-sponsor either at this point and did not provide a quote Tuesday to the Cowboy. However, Joe Jackson, a spokeswoman for Wyoming's junior senator, said she supports the principle behind the legislation. In my mind, my friends, any politician who is not in favor of legislation to stop illegal immigration needs to be replaced. This is a no-brainer, my friends. People who come into this country illegally are breaking the law, pure and simple. We have got to get back to being a nation of laws and not a nation of men. I mean, down here in the swamp, it is, while it's maybe not as prevalent, there are so many people that you hear say, well, these poor immigrants, we have to take care of them. They don't have any other place to go. Yeah, they do. Back to their home country. We cannot allow illegal immigration in this country for a lot of different reasons. And it's not just that one issue. One of the things that's been sticking in my craw for a really long time is judges that give out probation on pretty serious offenses. You see it in the newspaper all the time. This person A is convicted of drug distribution, possession with intent to distribute, and they're given probation. I know somebody up in Buffalo that they have 3 felonies of the same felony for distribution of methamphetamine, and the only amount of time that they spent in jail is 30 days. That's it. And you wonder why we have a crime problem. And, we've got to elect representatives and senators that are willing to take this on and not senators that and representatives for that matter that want illegal immigration to go by the wayside. I mean, as I mentioned before, Senate File 124 is a perfect example. That thing was killed outright in the Senate. And if you pay attention to a lot of the other bills that have gone through the Senate, they've been pretty intransigent when it comes to passing any sort of illegal immigration. So anyway, we've got to get away from that. We've got to become a nation of laws again, and prosecute criminals. I mean, if you're breaking the law, you need to be punished. And that's just a principle from our very founding. And, if an elected official isn't going to enforce the law, we need to get them the heck out of there. When we come back from the break, I've got a big story about Jennifer Granholm. It was actually written by a formerly Wyoming journalist, Kevin Keogh. It's a fascinating discussion of Jennifer Granholm and her ties to energy. We'll talk about that in just a second. You can listen to Cowboy State Politics Live every Monday through Friday at 10 a.m. on the Independence Network. Make sure that you subscribe and follow the Cowboy State Politics podcast. You can do that from the website, cowboystatepolitics.com, or anywhere that you get your podcasts. That way, you'll make sure that you won't miss a single episode of Cowboy State Politics.
Concerned about the future of Wyoming, but unsure how to help? Honor Wyoming is giving you the chance to create real, lasting influence. And it's as easy as 1, 2, 3. The Honor Wyoming Bill Tracker is designed to empower Wyoming voters. We're cutting through the noise and equipping you with all the info you need to keep tabs on Wyoming lawmakers, as well as the tools to take action on the issues that matter to you most. Keeping a close eye on key legislation in Cheyenne, we've made it easy to stay informed by providing real-time bill updates and timely take action alerts. Our one-click links make it easy to email key lawmakers at the right time. All you have to do is click and your voice will be heard. Ensuring lawmakers are listening to the people they serve year-round. Protecting the Wyoming way isn't a spectator sport, and voting is only half the story. Get involved today and do your part. With the Honor Wyoming Bill Tracker, it's as easy as 1, 2, 3.
Welcome back to the program, Cowboy State Politics Live. I'm your host, David Iverson, Wyoming's conservative voice. You remember Jennifer Granholm? Yeah, she was President Barack Obama's energy secretary. And the only reason I bring her up is she is the pinnacle example of the problems we have in our energy sector. Democrats, they're not in favor of any sort of energy that comes from extractive industries. In fact, they call it fossil fuels, which isn't even accurate anyway. And the truth is, when you talk about renewable energy, which is what they call wind and solar, and geothermal and all that, the truth is that our petroleum-based resources, they're renewable too. You see, oil is constantly being produced, and it's a classic example of how the left has been pretty good at demonizing our energy industries. And as we all know in Wyoming, that's the lifeblood of our state, and frankly, it's the lifeblood of our country also. Wyoming is one of the biggest coal producers in the world. In fact, I think we're like the seventh biggest coal producer in the world or something. But we produce a huge majority of the coal that powers the United States. Well, Jennifer Granholm, during the Barack Obama administration and the Biden administration, I mean, she kept tabs on them as well. But if you look at the Powder River Basin or the Buffalo RMP, it was the Biden administration's pretty much goal to shut down coal mining, and that RMP would have done it. Thank you, President Donald Trump, for getting rid of that for us. We really appreciate it. But it's always important to keep tabs on where these bureaucrats and radicals are going. You know, one of my big frustrations is when people get elected to office and they serve a little bit of time and then they get out of elected office and they immediately become a lobbyist. And a lot of times they rake in huge sums of money to consult or be a lobbyist for, you know, this industry or that industry, or, I mean, you name it. And Jennifer Granholm is probably one of the biggest ones. And this article by Kevin Keogh, and Kevin Keogh is from Wyoming. He used to work for County 17 News, and he worked for the Cowboy for a while. And when I saw his name on this article, I just had to bring it to you because he does, in my opinion, he does an excellent job in reporting. But the title of the piece is Granholm Energy Department gave California utilities $600 million. Now she'll sit on their boards. Well, of course she will. Now, just to give you a little, jog your memory a little bit about who Jennifer Granholm is, who could forget this?
What is the Granholm plan to increase oil production in America?
Oh my God. That is hilarious. Would that I had the magic wand on this. As you know, of course, oil is a global market. It is controlled by a cartel. That cartel is called OPEC, and they made a decision yesterday that they were not going to increase beyond what they were already planning. So, you know, the interesting thing is, you know, the Department of Energy has...
All right. Enough of that. So, I mean, that soundbite is a classic, my friends. Her laughing, saying that the U.S. can't do anything to lower gas prices. There's nothing that we can do to ease the pain at the pump. Well, the easy answer is to drill, baby, drill, and start producing oil. And the United States was energy independent when Trump was in office. And when Biden came in, he put the brakes on that almost immediately. Now, another issue that came up during the Biden administration, and I think that just about everybody remembers this, but they sold off the vast majority of our strategic petroleum reserve. And that's important for our military readiness, natural disasters, that sort of thing. Well, the Biden administration sold off a tremendous amount of it. So here's Jennifer Granholm talking about the strategic petroleum reserve. She's in a congressional hearing and being grilled on this. But listen to this.
Number one, the reason why the president ordered the sale of 180 million barrels from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve was because Russia invaded Ukraine. And there was a crunch, a complete collapse of the ability to access oil on a global market.
Okay, all right. You remember that whole spiel, don't you? That it's Putin's price hike, that Putin invaded Ukraine, and that's why our energy prices are through the roof. All of that was a bunch of bull crap. The reason why prices were through the roof is they put the skids on all oil production. In fact, the Biden administration, they didn't even conduct a lease sale, which is mandated by United States law, pretty much for 4 years. That's one of the big things that Trump did right when he got back in office, is started those lease sales up again. But let's go to the piece from Kevin Keogh, and I quote, former Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm announced on Thursday that she will be joining the boards of directors of the Southern California Edison Company and its parent corporation, Edison International, one of the largest utility companies in the United States. This comes just 6 months after Granholm's Department of Energy awarded $600 million to a consortium of California utilities, including Southern California Edison. During her tenure at the Department of Energy, Granholm was accused of a number of ethics violations, including conflicts of interest and using her official position to promote companies that she had a financial stake or relationship with. Nonetheless, despite the widespread reporting of her controversial tenure, she was never charged or disciplined for any wrongdoing. Following her nomination and through her confirmation hearings, the legacy media showered Granholm with favorable press, calling her a champion of clean energy policies and the climate agenda. Despite the early praise by climate-focused news publications, her tenure was marred by controversy and ethics questions. In May of 2021, 4 months after Granholm's confirmation hearing, it was reported that she had held shares in Proterra, an electric bus company that the Biden-Harris administration had heavily promoted. According to the Associated Press, she told Congress in 2023 that she had mistakenly provided false information about her family stock holdings. Yeah, oops, I forgot to tell you about that one. Too bad it made me a millionaire. Yeah, whatever. In testimony that year, Granholm had by then divested of those shares, earning a profit of $1.6 million, according to the Washington Free Beacon. In April of 2021, Granholm had told the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee that she owned no individual stocks and only invested in mutual funds. In February of 2023, the U.S. ethics officials, the Wall Street Journal reported, warned top officials at the Energy Department, including Granholm, that they or their family members owned stocks that could violate conflict of interest rules. In June of 2023, Granholm confirmed to the Committee on Energy and Natural Resources that she had owned stocks in 6 companies, which U.S. ethics officials had judged to be non-conflicting. Her husband had previously undisclosed investments in Ford Motor Company. So Jennifer Granholm is the poster girl, the poster child for all of this insider trading. And insider trading really doesn't even cover it because, former officials, former politicians, cabinet officials, insiders, they make a tremendous amount of money by joining companies after they leave office. And of course, companies want to pay for access. But the thing is that you shouldn't be able to profit off of your public service. And this is a problem that's not only, at the national level, it comes into play at the state level too. Several times on the program, I have told you about a house on Bear Lake that is owned by now Senator Jared Olson. Weird. He comes into office, really doesn't have that much money, and then a couple of years later, he's buying $1 million houses on Bear Lake. I wonder how that happens. And so this isn't just an issue that happens at the federal level. It happens at all levels of government. It's a pay-for-play scheme, and it's absolutely wrong, my friends. And if we want to know why our government is so corrupt and why we can't get any good legislation passed to help out citizens, it's because a lot of people in government have ties up and down the ladder to various special interests, and you know what? It doesn't, and sometimes it doesn't suit their personal interests to support a particular piece of legislation. So I thought it was a fascinating article. Anyway, let's hear. Moving on, deep in the stack of stuff, as you know, my friends, every morning on the program, I just select, and it actually starts the night before. I find an article that I think is going to be kind of interesting, and then I just put it in the stack. When I'm at home, I have a printer, and so I just hit print on everything, and in the morning, I get up and start sorting through them. But of course, you've heard of Doge. I don't know of anybody that hasn't. But Elon Musk sent out an email to just about everybody that was working at home, and I find this one absolutely hilarious. But he sent out an email, said, "Hey, tell me what you did last week, and if you don't reply, I'm just going to say that you resigned from your position." Well, Trump has approved of Elon's productivity email. We're trying to find out if people are working. From the Daily Wire. And I quote, "On Monday, President Donald Trump endorsed the email announced by Elon Musk that told federal employees to list 5 examples of what they accomplished in the last week. Quote, I thought it was great because we have people who don't show up to work, and nobody even knows if they work for the government," Trump told reporters at the White House. "So by asking the question, tell us what you did this week," what he's really doing is saying, are you actually working? And then if you don't answer, you're sort of semi-fired or you're fired. Trump went on to say that a lot of people are not answering because they don't even exist. He also seemed to take a swipe at former President Biden's administration, saying that how badly various parts of our government were run, especially by this last group. Musk, who is overseeing the Department of Government Efficiency effort under Trump, announced on Saturday that the email would be sent out to federal workers. Now, just think about this for a second. We have a whole bunch of people that we've allowed to work from home. Now, during COVID, I kind of understand. I mean, even though I don't think that COVID was nearly as bad as everybody played it up to be. But we had a lot of federal workers that went home and they were allegedly working from home in their pajamas. And then we still have them working from home. COVID has been over for 3 years or so. And the Biden administration had a giant effort to keep those people employed, to keep paychecks going to them. Well, I've never worked at a single job where I didn't have to provide reports to my higher ups, to the boss of the company, saying, "Hey, this is what I did this week. Isn't it pretty cool? By the way, I made you a whole bunch of money doing it." But this is just a simple email, and that the media is freaking out about it is just further proof that we have a lot of people that probably don't exist, that paychecks are going elsewhere. And the truth is, my friends, if you have a job, you need to go to that job. You actually need to be productive. It's only in the public sector where you could not have to go into work, where you don't have to get out of your pajamas, and you don't really have to do anything. It's one of the reasons why we're spending gobs and gobs of money on projects that we probably don't even know that we're spending money on. We've got to get back to having our work ethic, my friends. Go to work. Actually do something. Make some money. You don't need to be getting paid to sit around in your pajamas. We'll have more after the break. You are listening to Cowboy State Politics Live on the Independence Network. You're not going to find a better source of news, information, and entertainment than right here on the Independence Network. Now, we're making a few changes, moving a couple things around, out with the old and in with the new, and that whole spiel. Of course, you could listen to my program, The Ramble Room with Ken Pendergraft, Locked and Loaded with the good Representative Tony Locke from Casper. There's a whole bunch more coming on the Independence Network. Also, don't forget to check out the articles section at the website, independencenetwork.us. It's loaded with op-eds, commentary, and news from all around the Cowboy State. You can listen to the Cowboy State Politics podcast anywhere that you get your podcasts. iHeartRadio, iTunes, TuneIn, really any of them will work. But the easiest place is just to go to the website, cowboystatepolitics.com. There you can find all of the shows, as well as any of the articles that I might bring up during the course of a program. That way, if your name is Joe Biden and you can't remember if you had your pudding today, well, I probably can't help you with that, but I can definitely tell you why you should have never ran for president. And now, back to our program. Welcome back to the program, Cowboy State Politics Live, and I am David Iverson behind the silver Cowboy State Politics microphone, documented to be almost always right 99% of the time, a record that nobody in the Wyoming media, and if you read the media this morning, there's a good reason why they don't have a record like I do. What's coming up in the Wyoming legislature this morning, as I mentioned at the top of the program, this time of the legislative session is kind of crunch time. There's all sorts of deadlines, and you got to rush around to make sure that things get to the governor in the right amount of time. Some of the things that are up this morning, if you have some time to watch on YouTube, restrooms in publicly funded schools. This is an interesting bill, and there's a ton of amendments on it. But it's a fascinating question to me that for time immemorial, we have known that there are two genders, that there are male that there's men and then that there's women, male and female. But it's only recently that the left has been fairly successful at confusing that whole thing, which kind of tells you exactly where the left is. I mean, if they can convince you that there's more than two genders, well, then they can convince you of anything. And it's absolutely amazing watching the debate on the floor in these. So anyway, that one's up for third reading. There's another interesting one, immunity for drug overdose reporting. And I'm actually in favor of this one, in favor of the restroom bill too. But this one is means that if you report a drug overdose, and maybe you're a drug addict and you and your buddy are doing dope and he or she overdoses and you call the ambulance, well, you have immunity from being prosecuted for, whatever crime that they find. Well, I mean, drug-related crime that they find. So I think that one's interesting. Other things on general, well, and actually, I should probably stop and just kind of tell you about what the process is here. So tomorrow is the deadline for bills to come out of committee in the second house, which means if it's a bill that started in the Senate and it comes over to the House, it first has to go through committee. Tomorrow's the deadline for all of those bills to get out of committee. If it doesn't happen tomorrow, it ain't going to happen. And then on Friday is the deadline for bills to come out in committee of the whole, which means the first reading in the second chamber. So if they don't come out tomorrow or on Friday, they're dead in the water and have to wait till next year. So looking at the list of bills, let's see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I mean, there's a whole big list of them that are up for committee of the whole. And considering how slowly the House has been working, I would say that we're not going to get through very many of them. A lot of them have a ton of amendments on them, and it's been the strategy of the left in the House and in the Senate, for that matter, too, to filibuster. Now, in Wyoming, we really don't have a filibuster rule, but we do have. You can always call a previous question. That's Rule 12.9. I talked about that at the beginning of the session, where if debate is droning on and you think you have the votes to shut down debate, well, you can do that. It's Rule 12.9. But we've only really seen that happen a couple of times this session. So considering how much debate is happening on each of these bills, I don't imagine that a whole bunch of them are going to get out. One of the ones that I really don't like, of course, if you listen to Cowboy State Politics, you know this, but I'm totally against the Convention of States. I think it's a dumb idea. It did pass committee, so it is in the list of bills to talk about during committee of the whole. I consider that one a profoundly dangerous bill. It really would open up the Constitution. And, my friends, we don't have a problem with the Constitution. We have a problem with politicians. And, ask yourself, are politicians following the Constitution right now? No, we have an out-of-control debt. We have, I earlier on in the program, I told you how a lot of law enforcement agencies aren't even following the law right now. So what leads us to believe that if we change the Constitution, that it's going to be followed this time? I mean, it's almost like we're telling them, well, now we've really told you, do it or else. Well, they don't follow the Constitution now. So changing the Constitution, profoundly dangerous concept. And I really think that this is a terrible bill. Funny story. I testified on Monday in the committee, and I walked up to sign up to testify, which you don't really have to do that, but I did sign in. And there's a guy standing there, Convention of State supporter, and he tries to hand me a button. And I said, no, thank you. I don't think I want one of your Convention of States buttons. And he goes, oh, you should have one. I said, I really don't think so. And he goes, why not? And I said, well, I don't feel like destroying the Constitution today. And then his next response was, well, I'll pay you to wear it. I said, you don't have enough money to make me sacrifice my principles. And that's what this is all about, my friends. If you support the Constitution, you really shouldn't make any decision to try to trash it, which is exactly what this thing will do. Well, there's a lot more, that's coming up in the Wyoming legislature, and I'll keep you posted. We only got a few days left, and then, it's send bills off to the governor and see if he signs them or not. Oh, one thing that I'm amazed that he allowed to come into law was the Wyoming Gold Act, the sound money bill. That one's been tried a lot, and I'm super pleased that the governor actually let that one come into law. So now we can actually start getting back to sound money, which I think is an incredible idea. Well, we've come to the end of another busy broadcast day on the program. Stay tuned. Make sure that you don't miss the podcast, which I'm going to publish about 10 o'clock today. It's that interview with people who are actually in the room of the Joint Conference Committee on Senate File 69. It's a great interview, and I'm telling you, the Wyoming media is not telling the truth this time, my friends. But that's coming up at 10 a.m. Make sure that you subscribe and follow the podcast. That way you can be notified every single time there's a brand new episode of Cowboy State Politics. But for now, from the depths of the Middle Swamp, I wish I was at home. I'm David Iverson, and this is Cowboy State Politics. See you tomorrow. Open Line Thursday.